During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Sarasota saw an incredible efflorescence in the performing arts. And when you think about that, you think first of artistic directors and performers. But I think Charlie, along with them, was one of the catalysts for the development of the performing arts in this community.
Charles Lewis Husking III, Charlie, was born June 20th, 1951 in Sarasota, Florida, to Charles Lewis Husking II and Lillian Pat Husking.
My parents had moved down from New York in 1949, first to Bradenton, and I grew up on Lido Key.
Charlie was the youngest of two children, his sister Sarah, 9 years older. His grandfather, Charles Lewis Husking I, was the founder of Charles L. Husking Incorporated, the parent of Glycochemical of Greenwich, Connecticut.
He was always a very glamorous figure to me as a kid. He would travel to Europe all the time on steamships and come back with all sorts of toys made in Bavaria for me as a kid. My grandfather kind of scared me in a way, though. He looks very imperious, like a titan of industry in a way, and he had a very warm side too, but if you crossed him or were scampering around while he was making a business call, you didn't forget it. So.
As a young man, Charlie's dad, Charles II, had a passion for baseball.
He wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. That was his dream in life, and he got into the minor leagues for the Giants and Dodgers. But he hurt his arm, so he never got to go any further. But he was 6'4" and kind of a larger-than-life attitude about him, a lot of fun.
His father's most eventful moment as a baseball player was back in 1935 as a 23-year-old pitcher for the Nashville Vols. He faced the ominous baseball icon Babe Ruth. With 2 outs and a man on first, Charlie Jr. threw a forkball and struck the Babe out. When Charlie's father left the minors, he went into the family business. A graduate of the University of Notre Dame, he worked in the family chemical company and family-owned aircraft screw company of Long Island, New York. In 1949, he moved to Sarasota, where he was involved in a variety of businesses.
He bought a lot of property, had lemon groves, had citrus groves for many years. I remember one story he told me when he first got to Bradenton, he saw a liquor store for sale that said Charlie's Liquors, and he decided to buy it. He wouldn't have to change the name.
In the 1950s and 60s, Lido Key was far different from what it is today. For young Charlie, it was an idyllic life.
The wide, almost empty beaches, very few hotels, and St. Armand's Circle had only 1 or 2 shops at the time that were open all year, and there was a rickety bridge to the mainland. And, there were like jungles of mangroves and all sorts of things to play in, and my dad would go spear fishing every night, and I thought that was such an exotic thing to see.
At that time, one of the attributes of the beach was the Lido Casino. Charlie regarded it as his very own private playground.
I took swim lessons there. There were restaurants and a ballroom. They had beauty pageants and gymnastics competitions and beautiful seahorses on the place. And it was just a thrilling environment for me.
Charlie attended elementary school at St. Martha's Catholic School on Orange Avenue in Sarasota. Charlie was a good student who enjoyed school and the Catholic experience. He was involved in many school activities and was greatly influenced by the Monsignor of the school, Monsignor Charles Elslander.
Who was the Monsignor at St. Martha's for decades in the 50s and 60s. He was a figure that I really looked up to. For a while, I was, probably because of an influence of him and other teachers I had, I was thinking of becoming a priest. I kind of lost that vocation rather early, but certainly in grade school and even the first year in high school, I was thinking about it.
Charlie's older sister, Sarah, influenced him in many ways. As a young boy, she and her friends would dress him up in costumes, sometimes as a prince, sometimes as an Indian, or sometimes a well-dressed gentleman.
We had a great relationship at that point. She was kind of a tomboy, so we would play touch football and play catch together. And I remember my first introduction to rock and roll was her spinning those 45 discs up in her bedroom on Sunday afternoons with her friends.
A motivated student, Charlie maintained A's and B's for most of his subjects, but his favorite subjects were reading and writing.
I can remember going to the what was then called the Chidsey Library, one of Sarasota's first library. My mom would take me there every week, and I would come home with 5 or 6, mostly biographies. I can remember getting biographies of Benjamin Franklin and the presidents and baseball players and all. So I was reading at an early age, and I was very curious about the world, I remember. And I credit my parents for that. It wasn't an era when you were in a lot of organized activities as you are now. You kind of were left to your own devices more, and I spent a lot of weekends reading and exploring nature and all, and those things are still touchstones in my life today.
His mother, Pat, was a fun-loving, sensitive, and artistic woman who introduced Charlie to the arts.
She was an amateur painter, and she was always doing crafts at her country club and fashion shows. And when I was growing up really young, she was painting scenery at the Players of Sarasota, and that's probably the first theater I was ever in. I would go with her when she was doing the painting of the sets, and I remember running up and down, and Peter Strader, the legendary director of the Players for so many years, told me he used to yell at me to be quiet when I was a kid.
In the early 1960s, his mother informed him that they were going to the historic Oslo Theater, located on the Ringling grounds, to see an Italian comedy.
And I said, "What makes you think I would enjoy that?" I was 10 years old, you know. But I went, and I absolutely loved it. I was enchanted by what I saw, and I think I was in love with theater ever since then.
Besides baseball, his father was a fan of Dixieland jazz, and he introduced young Charlie to the genre at an early age.
I was probably the only 12-year-old in Sarasota that could name all of Benny Goodman's and Glenn Miller's songs, because he played them incessantly in our house, and I actually came to like them, and I knew all about it. I remember we went to see Louis Armstrong in Tampa once, and somehow we got backstage to meet him, and I remember that as a little kid. So these were figures that I grew to like because of my dad.
Charlie inherited his father's passion for baseball, and as a young boy, he would frequently find himself at Sarasota's Payne Park, home of the Boston Red Sox, and later, Chicago White Sox.
Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford and Roger Maris and Sandy Koufax, they had to walk right past you from the clubhouse underneath the grandstand. And in those days, with pre-Gatorade days, they'd throw you a couple quarters and say, "Hey kid, get me a Coke from the concession stand."
True to his Florida native roots, Charlie loved the beach from the time he was a toddler. As he grew into his teens, he could frequently be found boogie boarding on Lido Beach. He attended high school at Cardinal Mooney, starting in 1966. At 6 foot tall as a freshman in high school, Charlie plugged into every sport and became involved in a variety of activities at Cardinal Mooney.
When you're in a class that only has 46 students, you're expected to play everything. So I played football and got smacked around a lot, and basketball, which I was terrible at despite my height, and baseball, which I was a little better and really enjoyed a lot. And I was on the school newspaper and the annual and the Key Club and things like that. As I say, it was a small school, so you could pretty much dive into everything.
His dad would take time to teach Charlie the finer points of the game. Together, they played catch, and the elder Charlie would show him the secrets of the infamous forkball that took down the babe.
He was hoping I would be the baseball player that he never was, but he was never pushy about it. That was good because although I loved baseball, I was a pitcher like he was, and I pitched for my high school team, but I just didn't have the prowess that I hoped I would have. But he was never one of these fathers that wants to relive his exploits through his kids.
Charlie began exercising his creative talents and journalistic interests in high school when, as a sophomore, he created his own newspaper. Charlie was writer, editor, researcher, layout artist, and typesetter.
I just did a mimeographed edition of a newspaper purportedly during the Civil War, and wrote all the articles and even did fake ads and war correspondent type reports. So I guess I should have known by that's where I was headed in my career.
In 1968, Charlie decided to become a movie director, undertaking a senior class project for his English course, creating a movie version of Romeo and Juliet.
Of course, this was the days before sound. It was just a Super 8 projection. But we filmed it at the Ringling grounds. I remember just calling up one day and saying, "We'd like to make a film, could we come out there?" And we showed up one Sunday morning. We borrowed costumes from the Oslo and the Players and swords from the Knights of Columbus, and we did ballroom scenes inside the Ringling Ballroom, and we fought the battles out on the terrace, and the balcony scene, shot in daylight, but on one of the balconies. And I was a director, I wasn't in it, but and then I recorded a soundtrack with music and narration afterward. And I remember they showed it at the county fair and all sorts of places.
In 1967, his mother took Charlie and his sister Sarah on an adventurous bus trip through Europe.
We did the typical tourist things. I remember one time in Holland, you went into a place and put on the Dutch wooden shoes and folklore costumes and all. But it really introduced me to so many things like classical music, for example, and some of the churches that we went into, and just really inspired me even more to be interested in history and world affairs, I think.
That trip would be the beginning of a lifetime of travel experiences for Charlie. Charlie graduated from Cardinal Mooney in 1969. After considering several options, he decided to follow the family tradition and enter Notre Dame University. At Notre Dame, he would cultivate the foundation for many of the principles of his life. The late 1960s witnessed a change in the social and political climate of the United States, and Charlie took notice.
I had 4 very interesting years there at Notre Dame, and Father Theodore Hesburgh was the president then, who was the head of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission at the time. And of course in 1970, Notre Dame, like many campuses, went on strike against the war. After Kent State and all of that, there were a lot of protests and demonstrations and teach-ins, as they called them, and I went to all of that and really got very much involved in politics at that time.
In his second year at Notre Dame, Charlie took part of the university's sophomore year abroad studies program in Innsbruck, Austria. It was a life-changing experience.
We lived basically at the base of a mountain in Innsbruck, and it was nothing to go after your 11 o'clock class, go skiing for 2 or 3 hours. And we lived in a tiny little chalet-like house, and there were always parades and folklore demonstrations going by outside. And we had actually 6 weeks at an old palace in Salzburg, Austria first, where we had the intensive German classes. And then we lived in Austria and Innsbruck for the remainder of the year.
During his years at Notre Dame, Charlie became involved in a variety of activities. He directed his future toward journalism and was on the college newspaper staff. Graduating from Notre Dame in 1973 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in American Studies, Charlie returned to Sarasota.
I came back to the Herald Tribune, got a job at the Herald Tribune. I think I was hired by Ed Pierce, the managing editor at the time. I think because he was a football fan and he was impressed with the Notre Dame connection, to be honest. And I actually started, my first job at the paper was on the sports department for the first summer. That's all they had open. When I moved back, people always asked me, "Oh, are you gonna buy a house? You're gonna settle down here now?" And I said, "Oh no, I'm just here for the summer or for a year or so. I'm not going to be one of these people that stays in their hometown." So I really had no idea I was going to go on to a big city or maybe a foreign capital and do writing.
The Herald Tribune was then located on US 41 and was owned by the Lindsay family. The newspaper operation was far different than today's modern facility.
I feel like I'm describing something from the 18th century when I talk to journalists about it now, because we all had typewriters then, of course, no computer, and carbon paper. You wrote your stories on carbon paper, so your hands were always dirty. And I remember I was never one of these people that could just start writing and things would flow naturally. I would write one lead and not like it, and I would rip the paper up, and after about a half hour, the surrounding floor was covered with 50 sheets of crumpled paper, and that was my creative process at the time.
Charlie found he was enjoying working at the paper and graduated from sports to covering local government. At the time, the Herald Tribune had no formal arts section, and Charlie found a niche that he could develop.
I started writing about the Oslo and other organizations, and then it evolved after that.
To me, one of the most significant chapters of Charlie's life was the role he played early on when the Herald Tribune made the decision that it was going to throw a significant amount of resources toward coverage of the arts. And Charlie was a part of a team of reporters who helped to define this community as an arts community, and also raise the arts to a level much higher than a community this size would typically support. And they did that by engaging audiences, by attracting audiences to various productions. So
whether it was a theater company or the symphony, they were building a critical mass on the basis of this level of exposure. But at the same time, these writers were challenging these arts organizations to do their best work.
Charlie developed a following and a reputation for being an honest reporter, focusing on telling the story of the local arts organizations and the actors, musicians, and entertainers that would grace the stages of Sarasota. His articles would chronicle the development of the arts. As each organization would grow, his pen was there. Charlie exercised great care to craft each article.
Charlie would sit at the computer, rubbing his head, rubbing his face, punching his desk sometimes, trying to find the right words, and then when he would be finished with whatever it was that he had struggled over, it sounded and read just as if it was the only way to say whatever it was that he was writing about.
When Charlie quoted you, he quoted the essence of what you said. He understood the meaning of what you said. However, that does not mean that he wasn't tough. He was actually always pursued the tough questions.
To me, I felt it was like polishing a stone or something like that. You could always make it better and smoother, and the transitions more adept, And plus you had especially in the later years when budgets were tighter and space was tighter and you had so much to tell and such a finite space. To me, that was the hardest, especially writing a news story. And I'm very proud that people have said that they always felt I was fair and balanced, to use a well-known phrase, and I was painstaking about that, but it was very difficult when the Oslo had a budget problem or the ballet was firing somebody or something, and you wanted to make sure every quote followed from the other and didn't lean too far the other way. And to me, I can remember that's probably why I retired so early. Some editors screaming for the copy. No, wait a minute, it's just not quite right yet. Please, 10 more minutes.
One of his very first celebrity interviews was with star of film and stage Helen Hayes, who was taping a program at the Oslo Theater. When he called to arrange the lunch date, he discovered she was expecting him to drive her.
Well, my car at the time was a battered, rusty Toyota with beach towels and suntan lotion in it. I ran and cleaned it all up and pulled it up to the curb, and it was one of those things where the way I parked, she got in, but we couldn't move. And I said, "Miss Hayes, you're going to have to lean to the left so I can shut the door."
His creative expertise was frequently sought out in unusual manners. Longtime managing director of the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall, Kurt Haug, would call upon his talents on more than one occasion.
And he would always call me and say, "Red Skelton is here and he wants to go shopping for clothes. Would you drive him around?" So I would do that. And then he called one day and said, "Lucille Ball and her husband," comedian Gary Morton at the time, "are here for this one-woman show, and she wants to tell some jokes about Sarasota. Could you come over and help her write them?" So I went in on the floor with Lucille Ball and her husband and wrote some of these Sarasota-centric jokes for her on cue cards.
During his tenure, he would interview artists and musicians such as Isaac Stern, Ray Bolger, Ron Howard, Dick Brown, and Luciano Pavarotti, political figures like Howard Baker, Ronald Reagan, and Gerald Ford, news icons including Harry Reisner, Mike Wallace, and Barbara Walters. He would undertake every assignment with enthusiasm, even those that were not always glamorous, going behind the scenes of the circus up close with an elephant, and swimming with the dolphins at SeaWorld. Charlie covered each story fairly, with respect, grace, and eloquence. Yet, of them all, one person stands out as Charlie's most revered: John Jordan Buck O'Neill. A Sarasota baseball player who played in the American Negro League from 1937 to 1955. Charlie was instrumental in providing him with a long overdue honor in Sarasota, Florida in 1995.
He grew up in Sarasota and could not attend Sarasota High School because of his race. And most of us would never have known that, except he became a commentator in Ken Burns' famous baseball documentary. And that story came to light at that time. I was part of a committee that decided we wanted to try to right that wrong. We brought Buck here. He got an honorary degree from Sarasota in front of the entire student body out at the football field with the band playing and the cheerleaders. We brought Ken Burns here to give a speech on his behalf, and they dedicated the Twin Lakes Baseball Park in his honor. And I got to spend a lot of time with him that time and on subsequent visits. And he was just like almost like a holy man to me. He had such charisma, and he was almost really like a Gandhi or Martin Luther King figure. And he had so many reasons to be bitter about his life, about things he didn't get to do, but he was full of such joy and love, and it was just so inspiring to be in his presence.
Over the course of his 33 years at the Herald Tribune, Charlie witnessed revolutionary changes in the newspaper industry. Typewriters replaced by computers, and the creation of SNN, a 24-hour news channel partnered by the Herald Tribune and Comcast Cable. Charlie and other print reporters would suddenly find themselves thrown into the role of TV reporters.
It was two different cultures, for sure, under the same roof, and the pressures of getting it fast and quick were so much different than what we were used to. And but again, I learned a lot, and I think I became a better reporter in many ways. I think I learned to pare a story down to its essentials. I found that I would have to write a quick lead for television, and really pare it down, and then that helped me a lot when I would go back and I would look at the lead from the paper and go, well, wait a minute, that's unnecessary. So I think one hand whereas on the other hand, I think we were able to impress on the TV side that, well, wait a minute, you got to get another source on that. Well, let's not go quite so quickly on that. Is that really clear what you're saying?
In 1986, while attending a concert at the Florida West Coast Symphony, Charlie would meet his life partner.
He was working in the business office of the symphony, which I was covering, and I met him casually there a couple of times, and also at a party.
I actually would, on the side, occasionally do page turning for guest artists that would come through the Van Wezel. I have a background in music, and I was page turning for a Leontine Price concert back in the mid-'80s.
She had been something of a diva, and she had a long list of things like the page turner wasn't allowed to wear cologne and all, and she accused him of wearing cologne, which he wasn't, so he was kind of freaked out.
I was very nervous. She was quite, a big star and had a lot of specific demands that I needed to be paying attention to.
And at intermission, I went backstage, and it's kind of funny. One of her entourage came up and said, "Oh no, Mrs. Price can't be bothered right now." And I said, "Oh no, I'm here to see the page turner."
So that was actually the first time he and I spoke one-on-one, just outside of passing in the hallways of the symphony. So that's how we met.
In 2006, after 33 years of covering the Sarasota community for the Herald Tribune, CharlieHuisking decided it was time to retire. Many factors influenced his decision, not the least of which was his mother's health.
My mother was alive and was in her 90s, and her health beginning to fail, and I knew that her time wasn't going to be too much longer. And I think, we had 2 years after I retired, and I was able to have lunch with her almost every day I was in Sarasota, and I can never, thank my stars enough for that opportunity. I'm glad I wasn't rushing off to cover some press conference at that time.
Charlie was not ready to give up his pen entirely, and soon found himself writing for Sarasota Magazine.
I've had an arts column there every month for a couple of years now, and done some feature stories there. I got to cover the Sundance Film Festival for Sarasota Magazine in Utah one year, and so I'm continuing to still keep my hand in the game a little bit.
He's so impartial, and he's so accurate, and if Charlie's writing something, you know that it is going to have all kinds of insight and really hit the mark. He's probably, everything considered, the best writer in town.
Since his retirement from the newspaper, Charlie has been able to embrace many of his personal passions. He supports local, state, and national political campaigns and devotes his time and treasure to arts and education. His father died in 1998 in an automobile crash. In 2008, his mother and sister both passed away. Following the example set by his grandparents and parents, Charlie has devoted his time and inheritance to giving back to the community he so loves. He serves on the board of the Library Foundation for Sarasota County and the Oslo Theater.
Charlie is one of our newest board members, and he brings so much to the table. I mean, he really adds to the dimension. He's one of the younger members of the board, so he brings a level of enthusiasm and commitment that is unique to him. He's enormously respected by everybody. And I just feel in having him on the board, we've broadened the kind of public awareness of who we are, and he brings a level of intellectual engagement with the work that is refreshing for people.
In 1946, Charlie's grandfather established the Huisking Foundation in honor of his son and Charlie's uncle Frank, who died in World War II. In Sarasota, Charlie's parents established a family fund through the Community Foundation. Following their ideals, Charlie has become a full-time philanthropist through these foundations on both national and local levels.
A couple real key donations that stand out to me, and I know that they mean a lot to Charlie, is the gift that he's given to SMOA, to the Museum of Modern Art, the Sarasota Museum of Modern Art. He is naming a classroom in memory of his sister Sarah, who passed away. And Sarah went to Sarasota High School, and Charlie has a great love of historical preservation, so it was really a natural, the gift. And I know that Charlie is so excited about the possibilities of SMOA and what it will be like when it opens, and the people that will go through the building and the people that will take classes in Sarah's classroom. It means so much to him. Another big gift that Charlie has done in the past and supported through the Huisking Foundation is his love and support of Season of Sharing, which helps people on the verge of homelessness in our community. And Charlie has been just passionate about that, about helping people who need help. And I think that's what I most really love about Charlie. Not that he helps people, he's helping animals, he's helping historic preservation, the arts. Charlie's just an all-around incredible donor, and he's just such a good person.
Involved in a lot of arts organizations, not as a writer now, but as a supporter. And I feel I'm in a good position to do that because I've covered many of these organizations for years, so I know what the good ones are and the ones that maybe I want to wait and see how they evolve. And so that's been a really rewarding kind of next chapter to my life. And not only the arts, but also social service organizations. I've been involved with the YMCA Achievers program. So again, I'm kind of putting on a new hat and really enjoying that.
The thing about Charlie is that of all of the people that I've met in this world, I don't think you can find anybody who is as genuinely nice as Charlie is. I mean, he's just got the most tender heart. It's just very hard to not like him. He's just that nice.
Another change in Charlie's life since his retirement from the newspaper is the addition of a four-legged companion named Capone, who has captivated his heart.
After Jeff's father died, we went up to the funeral, and we're going to try to place Capone up there. This belonged to his father, and within 2 days we'd fallen in love with him. We canceled our flight home, and we drove his dad's Cadillac home with Capone in the back seat. And as my friends can tell you, I bore them with pictures and videos and Christmas cards with me and Capone and Santa. I love the poster that says, I'd like to be half the person that my dog thinks I am, and I really feel that's been his effect on me. I just want to live up to his unwavering love and joy and a sense of adventures.
We asked Charlie Huisking his advice for those who follow.
I think a successful life is one in which you are loved and you do love, and I've been loved by so many friends and feel so close to so many people, friends, family, and my partner, and I think that's what it's all about.